There is a theory, a real theory, that Paul McCartney died in a car crash in 1966 and was replaced by a lookalike. The proponents of this slightly tongue-in-cheek theory point to visual hints in album covers and clues in distorted song lyrics to back up their story. But what if I told you that Roboute Guilliman is actually dead and has been replaced by someone or something else? That's right, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, the Superman in Sapphire, is actually long dead. Hashtag Roboute Guilliman. Now, I sense your skepticism of my idea. You probably think that the pressure of making YouTube videos has finally snapped what little connection I had to reality. You probably think that it's time we check the old man in the internet box into the home for tired old wargamers. It would have been nice if he'd have finished those battle reports, but at this point he's probably a threat to himself or others. Let's just hope he doesn't start talking about the time he got the alien probing. But here's the crux of the theory. There is a disconnect between how the universe of the 41st millennium was portrayed between 1993 and around 2017, and how it's currently being written post-Gathering Storm. Classic 40k, which this channel generally covers, contained a fully built universe complete with historical background, and this background was essentially frozen in time at a few seconds to midnight for a couple of decades. Occasionally this background would get fleshed out a bit more with a few more details added to various historical events, and at least once attempts to push the setting forward would be curtailed and rolled back. Meanwhile, New 40k is rolling the story onwards into the 42nd millennium and pushing the narrative forward. You are getting the return of the Primarchs, Primaris Marines, and a giant mega event every 3 years for a new edition, the Great Rift, the coming of the Silent King, and now Hive Fleet Leviathan. Classic 40k contained the source material for 2nd edition, the codexes, the Forge World Imperial Armor series of books, and the White Dwarf Chapter Approve articles up until about 2017. Meanwhile, New 40k includes the Gathering Storm, the Horus Heresy book series, which itself seems to function as a kind of rolling retcon to the universe, the Primaris Marines, and the return of the Primarchs. However, these two versions of the 40k universe don't exactly dovetail perfectly, which creates a weird shifting grey area as the newer lore attempts to retroactively alter the continuity established in the older background. Right bang in the centre of this narrative rift is Roboute Guilliman, a Captain America-like figure who is narratively and literally frozen in time from a period where the Imperium was slightly less broken but still pretty screwed, and is now freshly defrosted, healed up, and ready to move merch. I think we need to do a little chronological history lesson for this next bit so we can all catch up. Roboute Guilliman was created by the Emperor as the Primarch of the 13th Legion of Space Marines, the Ultramarines. During the Horus Heresy, he was on the side of the Loyalists, and once it was over in the 31st millennium, he wrote the Codex Astartes, the document that formalised the organisation of the Space Marine chapters. He then commissioned a giant stasis machine, so that if he was ever mortally wounded, the Ultramarines could quickly put him on ice long enough for a tech priest called Belisarius Call to figure out some way of bringing him back to life. Then, the Ultraman in Ultramarine got stabbed in the neck by Fulgrim, turned into the Ice Lolly in Indigo via stasis machine, and put in the Shrine of Guilliman within the Temple of Correction on Ultramar. He spent 10,000 years frozen like this, during which time the pilgrims that passed through the temple were said to have talked about the miracle of the Primarch, as it appeared that the wound dealt by Fulgrim to Guilliman's neck appeared to be healing, an apparent impossibility due to the stasis device. Finally, sometime at the end of the 41st millennium, during the events of the Gathering Storm book series, he was revived by Belisarius Call using some unspecified wizardry and possibly the help of an elder god of death. All's well and good, and he even managed to defeat the demon Primarch Mortarion, one of his fallen brothers, in single combat with an assist from the Emperor. There we go, you are all caught up with the history of possibly the most important person in the present day Imperium. However, wait one moment, because this chain of events doesn't sound quite right to me. As soon as you look into more detail, things start to look a bit suspect. The first clue that something is amiss is the building of the stasis device. If we look into the timeline of the deaths and disappearances of the 9 Loyalist Primarchs, Ferrus Manus and Sanguinius are both killed in action during the Horus Heresy. Lionel Johnson and possibly Corax went missing almost immediately after the heresy. Jigeti Khan in some sources went missing in the 84th year of the 31st millennium during the Great Scarring, but is also named by Roboute Guilliman in flashbacks as he is wounded by Fulgrim, so the exact date is uncertain. Next up is the Battle of Thalessa in the year 121, where Roboute Guilliman is stabbed and put into stasis. So that means that Guilliman told Belisarius Cawl to make a stasis machine for him and build the Primaris legions while a number of other Primarchs were still alive. Leman Russ went missing 90 years late in millennia 31-211. Rogel Dawn was killed in the First Black Crusade over 600 years later. Meanwhile, Corax and Vulcan might still have been wandering around the galaxy, but it's unknown if Guilliman knew about their whereabouts. This is all throwing up a number of red flags here. How exactly does this conversation happen? Did Guilliman just decide that Russ and Dawn should find their own tech priest and figure immortality out themselves? There are loads of plot holes here. I can tell you are already typing them in the comments section below. Well, I have already thought about them, and we are going to work through a list with today's video partner, NordVPN. For instance, what happens if anyone finds out about the Primaris project before Guilliman gets revived? Well, in canon, Cawl would stand accused of high treason, which would be fairly fatal for him, and Guilliman would remain as the statue in Cerulean forevermore. However, if Cawl had used NordVPN, he need not fear, as he could carry out his work in private and be protected from man-in-the-middle attacks, phishing, password attacks, distributed denial-of-service attacks, malware, malvertising, and finally, ransomware. Imagine being locked out of the entire Primaris project because you clicked the wrong link in an email. What other plot holes can NordVPN help us with? Well, what happens if Cawl couldn't revive Guilliman and something went catastrophically wrong during the revival process? Well, NordVPN has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so Cawl could easily protect himself if the revival process had unexpected consequences. Next plot hole. Why does this meeting not get recorded somewhere in case of emergency? Even Belisarius Cawl had forgotten the details of it, as he does memory dumps every 500 years. Maybe he did, and it got wiped somehow. Once again, NordVPN could have helped out here with its impressive suite of features. Cawl also didn't consider, what if Guilliman just gets flat out beheaded or vaporized or otherwise instantly killed and can't be transferred to status? Well, NordVPN could, I'm really not sure on that one, actually. But Cawl would have at least had 4 extra months if he signed up using the link nordvpn.com/oldendemon. You will not find a better offer elsewhere using this promo code, even if you look really hard. Link in the description or pinned comment below. But back to the topic, you've still got the question of if Cawl offered to make similar stasis fields and suits of armor for everyone else. After you view this action in that context, it looks like Guilliman decides that he is the only person that should have the gift of immortality and an entirely new legion of warriors, and that Khan, Russ, Dawn, and possibly Vulcan can just sort it out themselves with whatever's left. It's the kind of thing I mean when I talk about the disconnect between classic 40k and new 40k. The writing has actually diverged enough that it's actually starting to form an alarming pattern. However, I understand many of you will remain skeptical of my idea, and that's why I have created a visual representation to help guide us through the next 6 hours. It's called the Roboute Gullimeter. On the left side is me and my idea that Guilliman is dead and has been replaced by someone else. On the right side is the idea that the lore should be taken at its face value and he is exactly who he says he is. Judging from the results of my poll on the YouTube community page, 68% of you believe he is the real deal. I'm going to move you from on the fence to that right side despite my misgivings about the building of the stasis device. After all, he could just be a bit of a bastard, right? But of course, that's not all. Next, we have to slaughter a sacred cow, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and discuss the elephant in the room. That being that Roboute Guilliman's version of the Codex Astartes doesn't make any sense. The idea behind this was to break up the Space Marine legions into chapters, because during the Heresy, a single commander, Horus, was able to turn multiple legions, each numbering 100 to 200,000 Marines to his side, along with dozens of Titan legions and accompanying Imperial Army and Navy units in one fell swoop to almost wipe out humanity. Guilliman's patch for this bug was to split the legions up into individual chapters, 1,000 Marines strong, and separate them from Imperial Navy and Titan support. This would prevent or at least hinder any major rebellion. The Badab War, for example, shows that technically a group of chapters can all rebel in one go, but a lot of them had their own motives and command structures and were just locked in a series of complex honour disputes rather than being under the sway of any one single unified commander. When more loyalist chapters arrived, the tide turned on the Astral Claws and they were beaten down without being able to spread the rebellion any further. The trouble is, after the Heresy, those huge traitor legions were, and still are, out there, albeit in a slightly smaller form. The World Eaters and Alpha Legion eventually split up, and the rest of them partially dissolved after their command structure was shattered. But those demon primarchs were, and still are, alive, and if any of them commanded a force of 5, 10 or 20,000 Marines, plus traitor guardsmen, and even Titan legions, there is no way one of these new loyalist chapters is going to stand any kind of chance. Guilliman decided that the loyalist had to play by Queensberry rules, while the rebels almost had their entire toy box to choose from. But he went ahead with his plan and split the legions up regardless. And then he added a nice little loophole for it for himself by charging Belisarius Cawl, a single man, with creating an entire legion of new Primaris Marines in secret and outfitting them with loads of new weapons and armour that he would keep to himself until a predetermined time. That sounds pretty suspect to me. Now if we bring up the Roboute Gullimeter, we can actually see that, oh, you haven't been convinced at all. In fact, you're now further to the right hand side. However, this is exactly what I was expecting. Because if I whip out Occam's razor here and cut right to the twin hearts of the matter, so far all this could be easily chalked up to the result of the writers coming up with a quick reason for the new model kit and the Primaris Marines, and just leaving in some loopholes. Science fiction writing really excels when it's posing an idea and then exploring the ramifications of that idea, rather than when you try and dive in too deeply and explain how the science MacGuffin works and the ins and outs of midi-chlorians and laser swords. Sorry, I promised my therapist that I'd stop taking shots at Star Wars in every video. This one just kind of slipped in under the radar. Anyway, this could all be a result of rushed writing. The theory has fallen apart and I've wasted what feels like the last hour of your time on this insane video project. I spent all that time designing the hashtag for Roboute Guilliman merchandise as well. I could have been teaching you how to play Warhammer Fantasy, or redesigning the rulebook for Legions Imperialis, or perhaps actually done something productive for once, like volunteer at a food bank, or get back to my real job of maintaining the computer system for the British Post Office. But the real reason you're still unconvinced is that there is no suspect, no means, and no motive. And as my lawyer told the police that one time, without those things and a body, there can be no crime. However, I put it to you that we indeed have a suspect with the absolute ability, a strong motive, and definite opportunity. The main suspect is probably going to be obvious, so I'll just milk this little bit of tension out for a while longer. And done. It's Alfarius. Yeah, okay, some of you might have guessed where I was going with this, but it's not what the kids call a meme here. There is plenty of material that backs my theory up. So, short history, Alfarius and Omegon are the twin primarchs of the Alpha Legion. They are so sneaky and mysterious that they might at any time be impersonating each other. In fact, the MO of the pre-heresy Alpha Legion was for regular legionnaires to call themselves Alfarius when introducing themselves, presumably as some kind of psyop that meant their enemies never knew exactly who or what they were facing. As for where they are now, it's difficult to say. In New 40k, one appears to have been killed by Rogel Dawn during the Heresy, although it's difficult to say which. However, in Classic 40k, there is a piece of lore that predates this that tells of Alfarius dying in fairly dubious circumstances on the planet Escrador in a fight with, you guessed it, Roboute Guilliman. This is from 2003, during the classic White Dwarf chapter approved articles on the original Space Marine chapters. However, the account of the death is written in a way that the reader is meant to question whether any of it was real. The Ultramarines deny the existence of the sergeant who gave this testimony, and the Inquisitor recording it was believed to be an Alpha Legion operative. Plus, impersonating Space Marines is the Alpha Legion's entire thing. They might not be the fastest, the best shots, or great in close combat, but they have figured out that if you paint your armor a different color, i.e. the color of the enemy, it gives you a pretty large advantage. But wait, you might say. From personal experience, it takes more than a few cans of Farron Ball paint to convince an entire universe that you aren't just wearing another man's skin. After all, there was a giant shrine on public display that housed his body. Thousands and probably millions of people would have seen the face of Roboute Guilliman. Or have they? Let's talk about that shrine again where Guilliman was allegedly kept in stasis for 10,000 years. Why does Guilliman even need Call to build him a special field in the first place? Chapters should have plenty of stasis fields on hand to put their dreadnoughts on ice for several hundred years at a time. Beyond the Fell-Handed has been rocking one since the Horus Heresy. How sure are we all that it definitely does exactly what it's supposed to? Here is the dark genius of the whole idea. If I take a picture of my face and then using image editing techniques, I merge that face with the face of person B, then I stretch this video out to play over the course of 10,000 years. Then I put the video in a room so that a queue of people can walk past it. What happens? The first 100 years people will see my face, but 1,000 years later the people filing into the room will see an image that is 90% my face and 10% someone else's beautiful, gorgeous face. Then as people die and new people who never saw the original me enter the room, those people see a different face and remember a different version of me. And very slowly, I become someone completely different. Now let's do the same with a wounded, possibly dead Guilliman and a very much alive Alfarius. Human lifespan being as it is, a pilgrim to the shrine would see a 1% change, assuming they see the image once around the age of 20 and then once again at the age 120. And that's assuming that A, you even live that long, B, you are allowed to take a second trip into the shrine, and 3, you have full mental faculties aged 120. The 41st millennium doesn't have camera phones and social media, so no one will be taking a selfie next to it. Plus, yelling out that this is a different person is likely to be an on-the-spot death sentence. Also, until the end of the Great Crusade, a lot of information was lost, to the point that human remembrancers, the equivalent of war journalists, were sent to record important events, and those people were taking notes in paper and ink. And that's before the giant civil war, where things got even worse. This being the 41st millennium, and with the oldest living humans being, I think, Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, who is around 1,500 years old, and most likely doesn't have a photographic memory, he would have seen a 15% change over his entire lifespan, again assuming he saw it as a young man, and then once again as an adult. But surely someone would notice something, right? Yes, you're right. They absolutely would. They would notice that over time, an image of a mortally wounded Guilliman would slowly appear to turn into a fully healed Alfarius, as the slash on his neck is literally replaced by the slowly morphing video. And there you have it. That Forge World sculpt of Guilliman is the real deal. The plastic version is actually Alfarius. The clues are all in plain sight. Given the turnover of actual Space Marines, there is no one in the modern Ultramarines chapter that would even have remembered Guilliman when he was alive. In fact, one of the theories of the two missing Space Marine legions is that they were merged into the Ultramarine chapter after their primarchs were censored, so it's easily possible for a Space Marine of a different legion to become a servant to another primarch. This is just taking that theory down a slightly different route. And we are all assuming that the stasis shrine has crystal clear 8K vision and isn't either distorted because it's a magical stasis field or has some other form of protective field around it that is preventing rowdy pilgrims from throwing a bunch of orange pigment over it. I know that Alfarius isn't described as looking like Guilliman, but maybe with a few select bits of plastic surgery and a hair replacement, he can look close enough. Again, the so-called stasis bubble shrine and the effect of time on human memory will do the rest. But hold on, you might say, replacing a mighty hero within a chapter is crazy and wild, and totally out of keeping with the universe of the 41st millennium. Or is it? Replacing a mighty hero has already been done once with the Ultramarine chapter, because their chapter master, Marneus Calgar, isn't Marneus Calgar. Or at least, he wasn't born Marneus Calgar, and this isn't even speculation. In the Marneus Calgar comic, written by Guilliman, Calgar was the name of a 12-year-old aspirant who befriended a boy named Tacticon. When Calgar was killed by a Chaos cult, Tacticon assumed his name to take revenge, and so was born the Marneus Calgar we all know, the second best man in Cyan. All this is quite similar to the theory I started this video with, the idea that Paul McCartney was replaced by a body double. You might say that that is crazy, but in 60s Britain we didn't have access to high-fidelity social media accounts that could track each person's coming and going. And if the last few years have shown anything, it's that people love a good conspiracy theory, so it kind of took off. I mean, the theory worked because the Beatles were tricksy little hobbits and used to record hidden messages into their albums all the time, which naturally led to people scouring their material to find Easter eggs. Just listening to Strawberry Fields Forever, and at around 3 minutes and 58 seconds, you might hear the words, "I buried Paul." I'm pretty sure the Beatles lawyers will have the clothes from my back if I even think about playing it, so you're just going to have to trust me on that one. But the truth is, Games Workshop doesn't really put decades-long conspiracies involving fake narratives and unreliable narrators, and even if they did, they would heavily signpost it. If you've watched my video on the Legion of the Damned, there was some legitimate pushback from the comments section pointing out that the Emperor in New 40k has actually spoken to a certain characters through a kind of psychic connection and therefore can't be dead. In the novel Godblight, the Emperor actually talked to Guilliman. Surely the Emperor would know his own son, right? Well, maybe the Emperor already knows. So, during the book Godblight, Roboute Guilliman met the Emperor, or at least something happens between them while Guilliman was standing next to the Golden Throne. And later in the book, during the duel with Mortarion, we get his memory of what happened. Now, you might accuse me of taking this out of context, but hear me out. Let's read it together. And then that thing, that terrible, awful thing upon the throne saw him. "My son," it said. 13, it said. "Lord of Ultramar, Saviour, Hope, Failure, Disappointment, Liar, Thief, Betrayer, Guilliman." A few paragraphs later, Roboute Guilliman, the raging tempest, spoke his name, and it was the violence a dying sun rains down upon its worlds. Guilliman, 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 Guilliman. There are a number of ways to interpret this. One, the Emperor is just being a dick for literally no good reason. That's fully in character for him. Number two, the Emperor is talking to millions of different versions of the future, and the conversation is getting overlapped somehow, which was, I believe, the writer's intention. Or number three, it could be a conversation that happens when the Emperor is woken up under the pretense of talking to Guilliman and discovering mid-sentence that he had been deceived. It certainly makes the lines liar, thief, and betrayer make more sense. Alpharius would be holding the Emperor's sword, ultimately making him a thief. Now, you could just say that this is all nonsense and the book is totally accurate. I would just counter with the part later where Emperor calls Guilliman my last tool, my last hope, which would make Lionel Johnson pretty sad, as well as any other Primarchs that get returned to their setting in the future. I'm looking at you, Leman Russ. Don't worry though, I've got an even bigger theory on you in future. Subscribe if you want to hear it. It's quite a biggie. So there you have it. Roboute Guilliman has been replaced by Alpharius. If this theory was true, the real Guilliman was killed on the sands of Escrador in the place of Alpharius. Alpharius then went on to conspire with Khal to create a master plan, possibly even drawing in Fulgrim to help carry out the mock death and replacement. Remember, during the supposed resurrection in the Gathering Storm Book 3, no one actually sees what is happening with Guilliman. Calls auto-regularly completely covers him, possibly long enough for a teleport Homer to make the switch. Still don't believe me? What if I told you that Escrador, the planet that Alpharius died on, actually means changeling in Latin, and that a changeling was a substitute left by a fairy after kidnapping a real child? I mean, it doesn't. That last bit was a lie, but it would be pretty awesome if it was true. Imagine that for a plot twist. Let's do one last check of the Gully meter, and yes, you're all totally convinced as I planned. Probably because this theory is absolutely watertight. I think I've wrapped this up nice, so time to plug the merch and the Ko-fi subscribers who I feel confident are all absolutely on my side on this one. Remember to post that hashtag #FauxBootyGuilliman in whatever software takes hashtags these days. Is MSN Messenger still a thing? Can you put it on Netscape Navigator? I don't know. In case you haven't worked it out yet, this was a bit of fun on my part. I'm fairly convinced that everyone writing the official lore bible for Warhammer 40,000 believes that Guilliman is exactly who he says he is, and there is no debate on the subject. But there is one last sting in the tail. As humans, not only are our memories of the past fallible, but we are also terrible at predicting the future any more than 5 years out. From the steampunk future the Victorians envisioned to the newspapers predicting that the internet is a fad. We tend to fall into the same pattern of believing that the future is going to be more of the same that we see in the present. So when we think about the future for Warhammer 40,000, we all think that it's just going to be more of the same endlessly. 11th edition will be Ultramarines against Orcs. 12th edition could be Ultramarines against Emperor's Children or Hrud or whatever race needs a redesign, and this 3-year cycle will last indefinitely. We also tend to think that Games Workshop higher-ups would never allow something as wild as what I've described to happen. But in truth, it's not up to them. It would simply take a Black Library author watching this video and then pitching the idea to his or her manager, and then bingo, there you have it. The current King in Yellow plotline appears to be moving in a fairly wild direction, so I doubt FauxBootyGuilliman would be considered too over the top. All you would need to do is add a line into a book where Lionel Johnson, the latest Primarch to return, meets Guilliman, add some dramatic tension, then have them shake hands, but then have the Lion back home surrounded by his advisors utter the 5 words that could shape the lore of the 40k universe for the next decade. That was not my brother. And then Grimdark is back in the building, baby. Thanks for watching. If you like more theory videos, check out this one on Legion of the Damned, and I'll see you next time.